Good afternoon, I'm Jane Robley. We want to continue to cover the devastation that's left in the wake of Hurricane Helene. President Joe Biden is arriving back at Greenville-Spartanburg Airport. He first touched down around 1:40 this afternoon. He visited North Carolina and South Carolina today, surveying the damage that was left behind. Let's take a look right now at GSP. You see the president walking there under Air Force One. Marine One coming in for a landing just a few minutes ago after touring the storm damage over the upstate of South Carolina and also North Carolina. And then after arriving, President Biden met with South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, also members of the congressional delegation, Lindsey Graham, Representatives Jeff Duncan and also William Timmons. And there you see some of the Osprey that were in that entourage with him. Our Sydney Shadricks is on the tarmac and has been at Greenville-Spartanburg Jetport today, taking a look at all of this. Sydney, what can you tell us from your perspective?
Being here this afternoon, Jane, when President Biden arrived, was really something special to see him walk off the plane, walk off Air Force One, and immediately greet our state and our local officials who are going through this terrible, disastrous time. They're here representing all of us. And for them to be here representing us, being our voice to the president, was really something remarkable to see. I'll tell you, we spoke with Greenville Mayor Knox White after he spoke with President Biden, after President Biden greeted him on the tarmac, and he said, you know, President Biden really took the time to speak to the mayor of Asheville and to give her his condolences and to say that, you know, the United States is with you. And of course, we are all with Asheville as we continue to see the devastation there. And Jane, like you said, President Biden just now coming back from his aerial tour of Asheville, getting a firsthand look at Asheville and the surrounding areas and the devastation that they've experienced. Like you said, he also greeted our state officials, Governor Henry McMaster, Roy Cooper. We saw the mayor of Asheville again, Mayor Knox White, the mayor of Spartanburg as well, just all there to represent the people of North and South Carolina. And like I said, be the voice of us who are going through this terrible experience as they speak to the president and giving him a debrief of what's happening on the ground here in the Carolinas. And Jane, we do know as well as the president now boards Air Force One, he is heading to Raleigh. We're told that he will speak with Governor Roy Cooper's team in Raleigh, get more of a debrief of what's going on in North Carolina there in Raleigh. We also are told, per NBC News by the White House, that tomorrow he will tour Georgia and Florida. As we know, Vice President Kamala Harris touring Georgia today, one of the hardest hit areas, Valdosta in southern Georgia, to survey the damage there. But again, President Biden touching down here at Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport about 1:45 this afternoon, meeting with state and local officials. Senator Lindsey Graham was there, Representative Timmons, Representative Duncan there as well, as he gave his condolences and heard from our leaders, our state and local leaders, about what is happening in the Carolinas. There he is right there, President Joe Biden, getting off of Marine One. He'll be making his way onto Air Force One. There is the mayor of Asheville standing beside him. Like I said, when he got off the plane today, he spent a long time speaking with her and giving his condolences. As I said, Knox White told us when we spoke to him afterwards, Mayor White said that, you know, he really took a lot of time to tell the mayor of Asheville that the United States is standing with Asheville, is standing with Western North Carolina as we all are.
We see, and Sydney, we see North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper there. Also, you mentioned Asheville Mayor. Very important for the president to actually lay eyes on the devastation. You can explain something to someone. We can tell our viewers all day long what's going on, but when they see it with their own eyes, especially from the perspective of Marine One, or in our case, Sky 4, that we've been able to show people.
Absolutely.
It adds a whole different perspective to the problem. And it's very important, too, this federal disaster assistance, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, a lot of people are wondering where is this money going to go? How is this going to help us? So it is so vital that the president is here, that he is able to see where this federal spending will be going. And like you said, Jane, I think something that was interesting that you said is that, you know, all of us have been able to see these aerial images of Western North Carolina via Sky 4. We've been able to see what it looks like from above and to really have that full picture of those devastating images. And for the president to be able to get that look too, as devastating as it is from the ground, you can see from above just the wide expanse that Helene hit, just the wide amount of Western North Carolina that is damaged from Asheville to the smaller towns and cities surrounding Asheville. It really was such widespread damage, and for the president to see that from Marine One, I think is imperative.
And Sydney, you have been at that Greenville-Spartanburg Jetport really throughout the day. Is it still continuing service, or has it kind of been at a standstill with Air Force One there on the tarmac?
So we were told by officials with the airport that things would run as usual today with the president here. People may experience a few minute delays, maybe about 10 minutes, but nothing to if you're visiting the airport, if you're planning on flying in or out of Greenville, no major disruptions.
And that's actually great to hear. I mean, we always welcome the president
Absolutely.
To an area, the president of the United States,
Yes.
whoever holds that office. But sometimes people tend to grumble if it sets their plans awry. So we're glad to hear that they did that with very little difficulty
Right.
for all of
Right.
the other. And you know, in mentioning that too, Sydney, today's visit by President Joe Biden to South Carolina is the first visit by a sitting president to a South Carolina disaster zone since September of 2018. That is when then President Donald Trump took a walking tour of Conway in Horry County. That was after Hurricane Florence. But I don't know that any of us really would have expected a hurricane to have the kind of devastation, a tropical storm by the time it got here, that Helene has had on this entire area. This was a monumental
in the
storm.
upstate, in Western North Carolina, absolutely. And I just think that, you know, I can't echo enough how special it was to see someone from the federal government come and shake hands with the mayors of Spartanburg, of Greenville, of Asheville, and say, you know, this has happened, this is devastating, but the communities are rallying around you. And that was something that Mayor White echoed as well when we spoke to him. You know, he was asked, how important is it that we put politics aside in a time like this? And he said, essentially, politics have no place here. It is of the utmost importance that all of the communities rally together as one, come together from either side of the aisle, and embrace the people of Florida, Georgia, and of course the Carolinas as well.
And that's exactly what people need to keep in mind today. It was a very special moment to see them all congregated there on the tarmac shortly after the president got off Air Force One, knowing that there's no place for politics. These are all elected officials, and their job is to represent the people. Now we see President Joe Biden moving toward Air Force One. He is going to walk up the steps to Air Force One. We know that he's going to Raleigh next, right, Sydney?
Yes, he's heading to Raleigh. He's expected to speak with Governor Roy Cooper's team there. And then, like I said, we're told that tomorrow he is expected to tour Georgia and Florida. But yes, there he is now getting on Air Force One, soon to be en route to Raleigh.
And this federal disaster assistance is really, really critical. Of course, the first line whenever there's a disaster is neighbor helping neighbor. And then it's cities and municipalities and communities and counties and states. And then days after becomes federal assistance. But with this federal disaster assistance, it allows people, and they have that, individuals can apply for this federal disaster assistance. And they are being urged to do that now. Even if you're not really certain that you qualify, you're still being urged to apply. And one big point of interest too today, Sydney, was 3rd Congressional District Representative Jeff Duncan Part of his district, Lawrence County, is in his 3rd district. Also, Abbeville and Union counties, those 3 counties were expected to be added to the list of counties that were declared federal disaster areas. Jeff Duncan sent me a statement just before meeting with the president this afternoon and saying this, quoting here, "I am meeting with the president and governor," speaking of Governor Henry McMaster, "today to secure federal FEMA assistance. Those counties being left off the original declaration is not cause for alarm, nor is anyone to blame. We appreciate your understanding as the initial flow of information during a storm of this magnitude was challenging." So those words today from 3rd District Representative Jeff Duncan, telling people basically, do not get upset that if your county is not on that original list. He's meeting with the president, the governor, they're working to get that assistance. And so that's some encouragement for people who have not gotten that declaration yet. It could be on the way. Door closing there to Air Force One. President Joe Biden concluding his visit to the upstate in western North Carolina. Sydney, what's happening from your perspective?
We're seeing Secret Service leave the area. It's loud right now. Of course, Marine One getting ready to leave as well. The Ospreys as well that were carrying other elected officials preparing to leave as well. Really saying goodbye as the president heads, like I said, to Raleigh to meet with Governor Roy Cooper and his team.
And again, it's been 6 years since a sitting president, has had to come to a South Carolina disaster zone. The last time was September of 2018 after Hurricane Florence. Then President Donald Trump coming to Conway. Today, the upstate with beautiful skies, not completely clear, but not raining, welcoming the President of the United States as he surveys the damage that has been incurred. Really, this storm has affected pretty much the entire southeastern United States in some part, South Carolina being deeply affected and western North Carolina really being hard hit by this storm. But today, an opportunity for those elected officials, both city and state and federal officials, to have a word with the chief executive of our country and tell them what their citizens are going through, give him a firsthand look from Marine One safely, and now he will go on to Raleigh. William Timmons also gave me a comment ahead of meeting with the president, saying that yes, the 4th Congressional District also is focusing on additional disaster declarations for those other South Carolina counties and additional resources for North Carolina as well. These 2 states definitely feeling a simpatico. In a 3:30 briefing this afternoon for Greenville County, Sheriff Hobart Lewis said that Greenville County Sheriff's Office was going to be sending personnel into Buncombe County, North Carolina. Greenville County Sheriff's Office will send search and rescue crews, also search and rescue equipment. We still know that there are people unaccounted for, really in both Carolinas, but at last word that I heard was that there was some up to possibly 600 people in western North Carolina unaccounted for. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean missing. It just means that they have not been able to get access to communication, to be able to communicate to their family or their coworkers or their loved ones that they are okay. Also, Dan Tripp, in that same press briefing, Greenville County Council Chairman, said that Greenville County officials, a number of them, had done a flyover of Greenville County yesterday. And Dan Tripp said that there are pockets in Greenville County that are absolutely devastated, mainly in the northern part of Greenville County and southern Greenville County. But we're giving you a live look right now from the Greenville-Spartanburg Jetport as Air Force One is beginning its departure. It will trek down the tarmac and take off into the skies, heading to Raleigh, North Carolina, the capital of North Carolina. Sydney, also several Osprey there that were accompanying him. That's a unique aircraft. It can fly vertically or horizontally, so I guess they're also a transport aircraft accompanying the president when he was on Marine One.
Yeah, that's right, Jane. All Marine One, the Ospreys, yes, all taking that tour around western North Carolina. As you can see, Air Force One getting ready to leave Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport, heading heading to Raleigh, as you said, Jane. It's been quite the eventful afternoon here in Greenville, as, like I said, the president was able to meet with our local and state officials and then have that aerial view of one of the hardest hit areas from Hurricane Helene. And we expect now, as he goes and talks to Governor Roy Cooper's team in Raleigh, that he'll be debriefed even more of the damage that North Carolina has seen, that they're feeling, before he heads to Georgia and Florida tomorrow.
It has got to be a comfort for people, Sydney. The devastation is huge. It is massive. It's not a small swath. It's pretty much, we all know somebody who, at the very least,
yes,
has lost power, and at the very most has lost everything, including family members.
Yes, and I think, being from Georgia, there are people who I know and love in Georgia who have college students in Asheville, and they called me when Helene hit, and they said, Sydney, we cannot get in touch with our son. He goes to UNC Asheville. We can't get in touch with him. We don't know where he is. Is there anything that you can do? And I cannot tell you the feeling of helplessness that I felt when I said, I don't know what I can do. I can't reach him either. I don't have cell service there either. And there's something about a natural disaster, whether you're directly impacted or whether you know someone who is impacted, that does give you that sense of helplessness. But I can tell you, one of the most encouraging things that I have seen has been seeing people come together in a time like this. And we're not talking about, just Republicans coming together with Democrats. We're not just talking politics coming together in the time of a natural disaster. We are talking neighbors coming together, neighbors helping neighbors, to help all of us get through this, because like you said, it's either impacted us directly or we know someone who has been impacted. And it is just of the utmost importance that we practice kindness now, that we practice grace, that we practice generosity, as all of us, whether it's North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, or Georgia, as we try to come through this together, Jane.
Yeah, and even though we're a month out from the election, you have to look at this. This is Air Force One. This is the President of the United States. This is not a political move at all. This is the Commander-in-Chief and the Chief Executive of our country who is coming to take a look at these areas that are now being declared federal disaster areas, eligible for federal money to help people rebuild. And I think that it's got to provide Rashad people a real sense of comfort to know that he has laid eyes on the devastation that our viewers are living through right now.
Absolutely, he was visible, and I think for people to not only hear, hey, the government is going to assist you, but to see him here and see some of the other federal agencies around taking a look, it really means a lot, I know, to so many people, again, dealing with the devastation and the aftermath of Helene.
And there it is, Air Force One against the skies of the Carolinas, and is now on his way to Raleigh. We were not given details for security reasons, about exactly what the president saw today on Marine One. Perhaps the White House will give us that information at some point later, but ahead of time, we were not told that. Accompanying him today also was the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. With North Carolina officials, South Carolina officials, Republicans and Democrats together on the tarmac at Greenville-Spartanburg Airport, all coming together to try to do what they can as quickly as they can to relieve some of the pressure that's on people who don't know where their loved ones are, who don't have power, some who've just literally lost everything. I think that is certainly a note of encouragement for everyone to see this.